In the winter of 2017, in the remote wilderness of northern Manitoba, Canada, there lived a man named Thomas Whitehorse who had given up on the world. At 63 years old, after losing his wife to cancer and his only son to the war in Afghanistan, Thomas had retreated to a cabin his grandfather built in 1952. Deep in the boreal forest where cell phones didn't work and the nearest neighbor was 40 miles away. He went there to be alone, to live out his remaining years in silence, surrounded by trees instead of memories. He told himself he didn't need anyone anymore. That solitude was a choice, not a sentence. But every night, when the northern lights danced across the sky and the cabin felt too quiet, Thomas knew he was lying to himself. Loneliness isn't the absence of people, it's the absence of connection. And Thomas had severed every connection he had left. If you are enjoying this video and want to see more in the future, please like, subscribe, and share with friends and family members who also enjoy. This way, I can continue to bring you additional videos for free. Thank you, and enjoy. It was on a January night, when the temperature had dropped to -30 degrees Celsius, that Thomas heard the howling. Not the distant chorus of a pack, but a single voice. Closer than it should be. Persistent. Almost. Desperate. Thomas grabbed his rifle not to shoot, but northern Manitoba demanded respect for its predators and stepped onto his porch. The howling stopped. In the beam of his flashlight, about 50 yards from the cabin, stood a wolf. But not like any wolf Thomas had seen in his decades living in these woods. This one was massive, with fur so dark it seemed to absorb the light. And it wasn't moving, just standing there, staring directly at him. "Go on," Thomas shouted. "Get out of here." The wolf didn't move. Thomas fired a warning shot into the air. The wolf flinched but didn't run. Instead, it took 3 steps forward, limping badly on its front left leg, and then collapsed into the snow. Thomas lowered his rifle. The wolf was injured. Badly. He should have gone back inside. Should have let nature take its course. That's what you did out here. Survival of the fittest. No room for sentiment. But Thomas found himself walking toward the wolf anyway. Rifle ready? His grandfather's voice in his head. "A wounded animal is the most dangerous animal, boy. Respect that." The wolf's breathing was labored, creating small clouds in the frozen air. As Thomas got closer, he could see the problem. The wolf's leg was caught in what looked like old trapper's wire, cutting deep into the flesh. The leg was swollen, infected. Without help, the wolf would die. Probably within a day or two. Thomas knelt in the snow 6 feet from the wolf. "I'm going to help you," he said quietly, surprising himself with the words, "but you need to let me. Understand?" The wolf's yellow eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, Thomas saw something he hadn't expected. Not aggression, not fear, but a kind of weary resignation. The same look he'd seen in his own mirror every morning since his son's funeral. The look of someone who'd stopped fighting, who'd accepted that this was the end. "Yeah," Thomas whispered. "I know that look." Working slowly, talking constantly in a low, calm voice, Thomas approached the wolf. He'd brought wire cutters from the cabin, thick leather gloves, and a first aid kit meant for humans, but adaptable. The wolf watched him but didn't move, didn't snarl. It was as if the animal understood that Thomas was its only chance. Or maybe it was just too exhausted to care anymore. It took 40 minutes of careful work in the freezing cold. Thomas cut away the wire, cleaned the wound with antiseptic that made the wolf whimper, and wrapped the leg as best he could. His hands were shaking from cold, from adrenaline, from being this close to a predator that could kill him with a single bite. When he finished, he stood and backed away. "There," he said, "that's all I can do. The rest is up to you." The wolf struggled to its feet, testing the bandaged leg. It looked at Thomas for a long moment. Then it turned and limped into the darkness, disappearing between the trees. Thomas went back inside, his heart pounding. He told himself that was the end of it. A good deed in a cold world. Nothing more. But the next evening, the wolf was back, sitting in the same spot, 50 yards from the cabin, just waiting. Thomas opened the door. "What do you want?" The wolf didn't move. Thomas grabbed some leftover venison from his freezer and tossed it into the snow between them. The wolf approached cautiously, took the meat, and retreated. This became their routine. Every evening at dusk, the wolf would appear. Thomas would bring food. They'd watch each other across the snow, neither coming closer, neither leaving. Thomas started talking to the wolf. At first, just commentary about the weather, the woods, nothing important. But gradually, he found himself saying things he hadn't said aloud in years. About his wife, Marie, and how she'd loved these woods. About his son, David, who'd wanted to be a teacher but felt called to serve his country instead. About the guilt of being a father who couldn't protect his child. About the emptiness that had swallowed him whole. The wolf never responded, of course, but it listened, and somehow that was enough. 1 month passed, then 2. The wolf's leg healed. Thomas noticed it was putting full weight on it now, moving without a limp. It could leave any time. Return to the wild, to its pack, if it had one. But every evening, it came back. And every evening, Thomas was waiting. On a clear March night, when the stars were so bright they seemed close enough to touch, Thomas did something he hadn't done since his son's funeral. He cried. Really cried. Sitting on his porch with a wolf for company, Thomas let himself feel everything he'd been holding back for 3 years. The wolf moved closer that night. Not all the way to the porch, but closer than it had ever been. Close enough that Thomas could see its breath. Close enough that when Thomas finally stopped crying and looked up, their eyes met with an understanding that transcended species. "Thank you," Thomas whispered, "for staying." The wolf's ears twitched, and then it did something extraordinary. It howled. Not the hunting cry or the territorial warning. A different sound, mournful and beautiful and somehow comforting. Like the wolf was saying, "I understand. I'm here. You're not alone." Thomas started howling back. It started as a joke, then became something else, something primal and healing. Every night, they howled together. The man and the wolf. 2 lonely souls calling out to the darkness, reminding each other that someone was listening. Spring came to the boreal forest. The ice melted. The days grew longer. And Thomas realized something that surprised him. He wanted to live again. Not just exist, but actually live. He started maintaining the cabin properly, planted a garden like Marie used to, even drove into town for the first time in months to buy supplies, stopping to chat with the clerk about the weather. Small steps, but steps forward. And every evening the wolf was there. Thomas named him Midnight, for his dark fur and the time they'd first met. He knew you weren't supposed to name wild animals. Knew it created attachment. But Thomas didn't care. Midnight had saved his life. The least he could do was give him a name. One June evening, Midnight didn't come alone. Behind him, keeping a cautious distance, were 3 younger wolves. Midnight's pack, or perhaps his family. Thomas understood immediately. This was goodbye. Midnight had stayed through the winter because Thomas needed him. But now, with spring's abundance and Thomas healing, it was time for Midnight to return to his own life, to his own responsibilities. Thomas walked to the edge of the porch. "I understand," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, my friend, for everything." Midnight approached closer than he ever had before. Close enough that Thomas could have reached out and touched him. For a moment, they stood like that. The man and the wolf, connected by something deeper than words. Then Midnight turned and trotted back to his pack. They disappeared into the forest together, the younger wolves bounding ahead while Midnight paused once at the tree line to look back. Thomas raised his hand. A wave. A salute. A farewell. Midnight's tail swished once, and then he was gone. Thomas didn't see Midnight again, not up close. But sometimes, on clear nights, he'd hear howling in the distance, and Thomas would step onto his porch and howl back. A conversation across the wilderness. A reminder that the connection they'd formed didn't end just because they'd said goodbye. Thomas lived in that cabin for another 6 years. He reconnected with old friends, started volunteering at the Veterans Center in town, helping other people who'd lost loved ones to war. He even adopted a retired military dog named Scout who kept him company on long winter nights. But the picture that sat on his mantle, next to photos of Marie and David, was one he'd managed to capture on an old camera. It showed a massive dark wolf sitting in the snow at dusk, illuminated by the cabin's porch light. To anyone else, it was just a picture of wildlife. But to Thomas, it was a reminder. That healing comes from unexpected places. That connection can exist without words. That sometimes, the thing that saves us is simply knowing that someone or something chooses to stay, even when they don't have to. Especially then. In 2023, Thomas Whitehorse passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 69. They found him in his cabin, in his favorite chair by the window that overlooked the forest. And according to the neighbor who discovered him, there were wolf tracks in the snow outside. Fresh tracks, as if something had come to say goodbye. Some connections transcend understanding. Some bonds refuse to break, even when separated by miles, by years, by the very nature of existence itself. Thomas had gone to the wilderness to die alone. Instead, he found a wolf who taught him how to live again. And in return, Thomas taught that wolf that humans, like wolves, understand loyalty, understand sacrifice, understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply show up every single day, even when it's hard, especially then. In the boreal forests of northern Manitoba, if you listen carefully on quiet nights, you might hear it. A wolf howling. And some say, if the wind is just right, you can hear something else too. An echo, or maybe a response. A reminder that some friendships don't end with goodbye. They just change form, continuing on in the spaces between heartbeats and howls, forever.